Okay, be quiet. Psst, 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 psst. Okay, I think we are live. Can you just drop a 1 if you can hear me okay? So the UK is in big trouble, especially again this winter. This is what what we're just hearing today. A lot of news out today, actually. Good, lots of 1s. Thank you very much. A lot of news out today, actually. You can see I'm in my fleece. I did a little experiment this morning, and the experiment this morning was not to put the heating on and see how long I would last doing my work, in order to actually understand how this is going to impact families this winter. And let me tell you, I got to about lunchtime, my fingers were freezing trying to type. So I wanted to really understand the gravity of this situation that has just been announced. So if you thought last winter was bad, if you're watching, if you're one of the, I think it's 32% subscribers are from the UK at the moment, well, these reports are saying that this winter could be a lot worse. We've got energy debt, increase to the price cap, bailing out energy suppliers. Sorry? Bailing these energy suppliers out, okay. Increase to energy costs across the board, UK government debt as well, and finally, they finally admitted that a recession is coming. So let me hit you with the intro here. Household energy debt is at a 5-year high, with more households owing money to firms than last year. Charities are concerned as winter approaches, especially with less support for households despite the rise from last year. Now, there's this energy cap as well, and these energy incentives that just haven't been claimed, and I'll tell you why they haven't been claimed. The media isn't being honest on this, saying that something like 800,000 people just haven't decided to claim. It's actually not true. So let's start with the first point then, and this is all around energy debt. So I did well, actually I haven't done many calculations on this, but I can do them in my head as we're going through. So there's 3.2 million households currently in debt to their energy supplier. This is in the UK, 3.2 million households, which might not sound like a lot if you're from outside the UK, because you know a lot of countries are much bigger, but the UK is quite a small country. So I looked up and I tried to get a median on how many homes there are. So it ranges from 22 up to 26 million homes. So if we just say 25 million homes in the UK, right? Divide that by 3.2, that's just under 13%. I think that's 12.85, 12.9%, right? So this is the situation right now. This is the level of debt and the level of people who are in debt at the moment. Obviously, many of you potentially as well. And oh my goodness, I should not have let my cat in the room during this stream. She is going crazy. Okay. Anyway, so the average debt now stands at £216, a 13% increase from last year as well. Now, one thing they're not really focusing a lot is the crude oil price, and this is just under $90 a barrel now. Right, I'm going to let her out very quickly. Out. Goodness me. Right, so if we look at the Brent price here, we can actually see where it is right now. It's at almost $90 a barrel, and crude's at 86. So this is quite simple. When you actually look at this and you analyze it, and we talked about this last week, we also talked about it last month. What is actually happening? It's the oil price that's feeding into this. Now, the reason the government and the media don't want to focus on the oil price is because they have caused this. Remember all the self-sanctions where they cut off, Russian energy, Russian oil, things like that. So they have caused these issues themselves, but they just don't want to admit that. That's why they don't talk about it. But yeah, this $90 almost a barrel is going to feed into the inflation. Now, this person, his name's Richard Newdegg. He's the director at Uswitch, right, which is the big energy company. He said one of the biggest problems is that families haven't built up a war chest. So he says building up a war chest of around 2 months of energy credit is important as we head into winter. And it's worrying that more than 9 million households have no buffer against the coldest months. So if you read a few of the comments he's made, he seems to be blaming families for not building up a war chest here. But this doesn't really make any sense. If you think about this rationally, if you are connected and in touch with the people, you would know that even if you did have, let's say, a 3-month war chest, as he's calling it, right? What we would call an emergency fund. I've talked about having an emergency fund before. Even if you had one, right, that would have been wiped out in what, 2021? 2022 definitely. Not many families still have an emergency fund right now as we're at the end of 2023 going into 2024. So I think some of these people, because they're on such high salaries, they're probably a little bit out of touch with the average person. So blaming families for not having enough money saved up, it just isn't the case here. That isn't what's happening. He says over 9 million households lack energy credit entering winter. And obviously this is a big concern because they're talking about how 9 million households are not going to be able to afford it. So that's triple the amount that are currently in debt. 9 million out of the 25 million. That is serious. It's serious, but it's not unexpected because we know what's happening at the moment. The level of inflation in the UK is on another level. It's on another level to other countries because UK inflation is the worst of the more developed G20, the more developed Western countries, I think we can say. Another thing they're not talking about either is the fact that this October, to me, feels a lot colder than last year. So I remember going away last year, coming back, and it was still okay temperature, but this week coming back has been pretty cold. It really has been pretty cold. So I think we're probably going to see potentially colder weather this year, even though, they're talking about how it's going to, winters are getting hotter and all this sort of stuff. I'm not convinced by that. I still need to see a little bit more data on that, but I'm not convinced by what they're saying. So I think if we saw this really freezing cold winter, that is going to be very bad for energy bills as well. Now, there's a lot of charities, especially energy charities, they are coming out and they're basically waving the red flag here and saying that there could be a lot of people that die this year, as has happened last year. Again, you don't hear about this, but a lot of older people did die last year. If you know a police officer, someone that works, ambulance, things like that, they will tell you, if you ask them, they will tell you that they found a lot of people in their homes, where you knock on the door, oh, Mrs. Smith, are you home? And there's no answer. So they'll have the police come by, etc. And that's what they found last year. So a lot of people did die last year. And this is why I said that you will see people, and again, I didn't come up with this expression, but you'll see people have to make that decision between do they heat or do they eat? And, there's only so much you can, again, I don't like to use the word squeeze people, but that is what they are doing. They are squeezing people to the point where they just can't afford anything anymore. And that's really what we're seeing at the moment. And what are they blaming then on these energy? They're blaming, now remember before it would be the same line. They would say Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine. That was the line that you would always see, and they blamed that. So now they're blaming it on, I haven't got the line here, but they're blaming it on what happened last weekend with Israel. Right, so now they're saying this is the reason that UK households are going to have high energy bills this winter. It's all because of what happened last weekend. Again, this is not true. The media just use and abuse really terrible situations that are going on in the world right now, and they really are terrible. Seriously, my prayers go out to all the people, because we're seeing a lot of civilian deaths everywhere at the moment in all these different conflicts. But that's not what they focus on. They use it and they spin it as a way to blame those things on, rather than take responsibility, because when you take responsibility, you can actually solve the problem. But when you don't take any responsibility over a problem, that's when you have issues and the problem continues to go on. That's what we're seeing with the debt as well. The other thing is they're talking about a possible one-off charge of £17 per household annually to avert energy suppliers going bankrupt. Now, I'll come on to this later because there's a lot going on here, but they also want to look at bringing in these payments to help energy suppliers when they're having financial difficulties, when people haven't paid and things like that. And what I really got from that was they want to squeeze the poorest people, and they've done this with a standing charge and all the other stuff. They want to squeeze the poorest people, which is the masses, right? It used to be like this, now it's like this. So they want to squeeze the poorest people and take that money, give it to the companies, right? Who then use that and redistribute that money to shareholders, which are the wealthiest people. So all we're seeing is just this wealth transfer. It's going from the people who are in poverty, they can't afford to pay these bills anyway, and now the government's great idea is to actually help these big companies. Why would the government not just help them? The government should give them a loan if that's what they want to do, or the bank. But the bottom line is, if they are not profitable and they're not doing a good job and they're inefficient, that is capitalism. The company should fail. You have another company comes in, runs it more efficiently, more effectively. You take down some of the barriers of entry so that you can get more competition coming in. Competition drives down prices, it increases inefficiency and technology, all these things that they just don't want to do. And you've got to ask the question, why is that? Or then you start looking into, who are the shareholders? Do the government, do the politicians own any shares? Do they get any donations from these companies? As soon as you start looking into it, it makes a lot of sense. Like what happened with Severn Trent Water. The amount of tens of billions that were paid out to shareholders, and then the taxpayers on the line for the exact same amount that was paid out to shareholders. It's just one big circus, one big club. Now the next thing is they're talking about how the energy price, the cap, might go back over at £2,000 from next year, 2024. Which is interesting because I did pull up, I was wondering why they're not mentioning the natural gas price. So I did pull it up. I've got all the charts on this, and it doesn't make sense what they're talking about. This makes no sense whatsoever. Because if we go back to November, November 2022, you can see it was 7.4. Now if we look at where it is now, it's 3. That is a massive, massive drop. So they're saying that, because of what's happening in Israel and all these other things, thank you very much, appreciate that. Because of all these other things, that the gas price is exploding. That's not the reason at all. There's a lot more going on here, and they're just coming up with all this spin. What else have they been saying then? They said that, here's their recommendation if you can't afford your energy bill. They're saying that you should contact your energy provider and let them know. That's the last thing I would do, personally, if it were me. I remember when years and years ago, gosh, I was in my early 20s, and I had a problem. There was something that happened. I think my bank account was, I can't remember exactly what happened, but I think someone got into my bank account, they drained my bank account. I mean, we're going back a long time now, so I can't remember the exact details. And I told my credit card and also the loan and something else that I had, I told them that, oh, this has happened, I might not be able to make my payment and all these other things. And then it ended up hitting me really negatively, and my credit rating went down, all these other things went down. So I don't know if it's still the same now, but it's not something that I would be doing. But that's what they're saying. So it's a kind of BNPL they're talking about, buy now, pay later. I would say avoid buy now, pay later. I would never touch this sort of stuff, because this is how you end up just accumulating more debt. So they said that they'll put you on an affordable payment plan to help you out. Of course they will. Another interesting statistic is that 30 suppliers went out of business during this last energy crisis. 30 suppliers in the UK. What does that mean? Well, now that we're hearing about all these higher energy prices, well, is there something else going on? I think there might be, because when you have a monopoly over the companies, it affects citizens like yourself, and you end up paying more because there just isn't a lot of competition. Less help for energy bills. This one was the one that just blew me away. So there's all these, there's assistance that you can get for your energy bills. A lot of us are aware of this. Last winter, 800,000 bill payers missed a £150 energy bill rebate via the government's warm home discount, and they didn't really go into details why. This is according to National Energy Action. But actually, if you dig into this properly, it says the changes rendered about 500,000 people ineligible for the grant in the first place. Isn't that just insane? It says despite past eligibility, an additional 300,000 people missed out due to the scheme's increased complexity, i.e. many people found it too difficult and complex, so they just couldn't complete it. It was just too difficult. There were bugs. It was just, too long, all the information they wanted. And then this is where it gets crazy. Are you ready for this one? It says the other reason is many vulnerable households were required or are required to provide an EPC. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. This is an energy performance certificate, which costs, it says costing over £100. You can actually get them cheaper than that, but we'll just go along with what this article talks about. £100 for a £150 rebate. So if you don't have an EPC, they're talking about you going to spend £100 to get an EPC so that you can then submit your claim to get a £150 rebate. Who's going to do that? Who's going to go through all that trouble with the complexity to get £50 back? I just don't think, I think that's the reason they've made it very difficult, and it's probably deliberate. Following the termination of a previous scheme that provided £400 to all households, £300 for pensioners, and an extra £150 for disabled individuals, along with a £150 warm home discount. So these were some of the things that were going on. Some of them are not going on anymore. Energy charities are raising the alarm. They're letting the government know that a lot of people could die this winter unless they take some action on this. So what's the government response? Well, they've basically said the same thing they keep saying. They haven't got any money. They can't afford to help out the pensioners. And I thought that's ironic, because I just, again, did a rough calculation, and it's not a huge amount of money to help the most vulnerable in society. Your pensioners, the people who have disabilities, the people who have medical conditions where they need heat, right? Where if you don't have heat, as I did that experiment, it gets bloody cold really, really quickly, and it's hard to operate. So they can actually provide this assistance, but they said that they are providing a lot of assistance elsewhere. Yeah, we know where elsewhere is. And I'm not going to use the word Ukraine, because it's not Ukraine specific. What it is they're sending that money to weapons manufacturers in the UK, for example, or elsewhere in the West. Those weapon manufacturers use that money. They then pay out dividends. So here's the irony. Let's just get this again. Similar example before. The money goes from the poorest people to these big weapon manufacturers. They then distribute the profits via dividends to the richest people again. It's the same scheme that's going on all over. So they haven't got money because they are, supporting, conflicts and things like that, which are billions when they only need millions to help these people. And I looked at it and I broke it all down into tiers as to look at the most vulnerable. They can do it. It just doesn't make any sense why they are not doing it. Why don't they want to help these people? Madness. Okay, so let's get on to the increase in costs then. So they are talking about UK wholesale gas prices have risen to the highest level since February. Well, February wasn't high. It wasn't a high level. The highest levels were last year when they're, 120% higher than they are now. Just looking at the charts here, there's a lot of things that don't make sense with this reporting. So they're saying that it's dropped to 135p per therm on Friday afternoon, but it was way, way more than that before. And here's the statement. It says, the UK anticipates higher gas demand due to potential plummeting temperatures this weekend. Again, why is the weekend relevant? You want to be looking at the long thing. While the Israel-Hamas conflict has caused the closure of the Tamar gas field off Israel's coast. Okay, so that is valid, but again, all you have to do is a little bit of research and you'll see how much of our gas comes from that gas field. So they're talking about how, and again, this is inaccurate. They're saying because UK power plants for electricity use heavy amounts of gas. Well, actually they don't. It's about 10% of electricity at the moment is generated from gas usage. So none of this reporting makes sense, and it isn't difficult for anyone with a brain to figure this stuff out. You just look at the charts, you just do a couple of bits of research, and then none of this makes any sense. And all of these explanations they're giving, none of it makes any sense. It's as if they think everyone's stupid now and that no one checks anything and they'll just accept whatever it says. So let's move on to the bleak UK outlook. This is all from the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt. He says he is preparing, and that we all need to prepare for the worst debt crisis in modern history. And he's talking about, he says that we're going to see a very challenging environment, yet he expresses long-term confidence in the British economy. Well, yeah, of course he's going to express long-term confidence, but when's that? Is that 10 years? Is that 20 years? He discussed a 20 to 30 billion pound increase in government debt this year, which is over and above the projections that he made just a few months ago. This is where it gets really silly, okay? He says he praises the resilience of the British people since his tenure as Chancellor began. And he knows that if we all just stick together, we'll come through this together. Yeah, quite the motivational speech there. Let me tell you, he's not going through this with any of you, all right? I can assure you of that. He's not going to be there in the warm cafes, you know these that they set up last winter. I can't remember what they're called. It's like where the cafes put the heating on, or the libraries put heating on, or the churches put their heating on so that you can go there. It's a warm centre so that you don't freeze. Yeah, he's not going to be at any of those centres. Let me just assure you of that. So he emphasised the need for resilience, preparation for adverse scenarios due to global uncertainties. And he goes on to say all of these other stuff. So let me ask you a question, drop it in the comments. What do you think is meant by these global uncertainties, both present and in the future? What do you think he is referring to here? I have theories, but I like to read your comments as well. He admits that the economic figures, especially inflation, are not as favourable as he had hoped earlier in the year, reiterating the substantial hike in unexpected debt interest. Okay, the payments on that. All right, let's just think of this. If you even ask a teenager this question, and that is, hey, you can take on a loan from me, or you can take on this debt from me, and you've got to pay it back. You know, it's £5 a week. You've got to pay that back to me. That's the interest or whatever you're going to, capital and interest. They will understand that, right? So how is it that he borrowed an extra 20 to 30 billion pounds, but now he's surprised or he's shocked by the additional payments on the loan? I mean, it doesn't make any sense again. And he says that we're all in it together and we've got to go through these difficult financial decisions. Yeah, I'm wondering if he's going to raise taxes. That would be a surprise, because if you think about it, you've already had a tax rise, and the tax rise was the inflation. So as the inflation went up, your tax bracket didn't drop in line with the inflation. So you've already had a tax rise anyway. And we'll see if that is reflected, but probably not, because most people won't realize that. So they've also talked about a horrible bind as recession looms. So the experts now, all of a sudden, all of them said, oh no worries, no recession. They're all coming out the woodwork now saying, oh yeah, Q1 2024, deep recession. Even the IFS, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, is coming out and saying there's going to be a recession. Okay, this was the one that made me laugh. Come hell or high water. Okay, inflation is expected to drop to 4.3% by the end of the year, because Chancellor Rishi Sunak, this is when he was Chancellor, made this promise to halve inflation. I don't even think they've written this right, when he was in that post. But you know what? That's easy. Anyone can do that. You just go onto the computer and you just type in 4.3%. Okay, send that to the BBC. Send that to the BBC news desk, and then everyone else starts picking it up. Oh yeah, inflation is just 4.3%, like they did last year. When we all know, you and I, we go to the supermarket, we buy food, okay, we put it in our shopping trolley or cart, and we go to the checkout. We know how much our shopping costs. So for them to talk about, you know, the inflation, what it's been, it's an insult, really, treating us like we're stupid. You know, double the number, and that's fairly close. But they're saying the same thing they say all the time, that inflation is dropping month on month and they're doing a great job. No, it dropped so much because the energy prices went down. And now that the energy prices, especially oil, natural gas, not as much. I don't know where they're getting these numbers from. All you have to do, again, all you have to do is look at the chart. There it is. It's so clear. And then, okay, so this is what they've said. They admit the British public have some very dark days ahead. That's some quite strong language from politicians. They say it's all for the greater good of the country. Now, to me, a speech like that might have worked well 20 years ago. I think it would, when it was quite a more united country. But I remember when I left the UK, and I remember I used to know everyone in my road. Every single person, I pretty much knew everyone. I would say hi to everyone. I'd go for a cup of tea. They'd come for a cup of tea in our house. I tended to know everyone. And by the time I left, I actually only knew one person over the road and one couple, maybe 5 or 6 doors down. That was it. I didn't really know who the other people were. There were a lot of mixed houses. There were a lot of other houses. You know, there was I just didn't know who the people were. So I don't think they're getting this. They're still thinking 20 years ago, you know, riling people up for a war type of talk. It just doesn't exist anymore. And they're making out as well as if, especially with some of the comments they made, that some of the British people are greedy and things like that. That's just not the case. You look at the average British person now, they're not greedy, they're downtrodden. There's a big difference. And for you know, quite right as well, when we see the leadership and how things are going at the moment. I don't think it's going to make any difference who's in power. But, all right, that's it for today. God bless you guys and your families. I'll see you next time.